Hello and welcome to State of State. This podcast is presented by Bet Online, your number one source for all your betting needs. Get the latest odds, lines, and matchup reports for baseball, boxing, golf, and more. Bet Online continues to be the fastest and easiest way to place your wagers, including live betting, plus your favorite casino and card games available to play right on your phone. Head to betonline.ag or use your mobile device to join, and be sure to use our promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. State of State is presented by Bet Online, where the game starts. Also, State of State is a proud supporter of Blue White Outfitters. Blue White Outfitters was created as a retail shop meant to highlight the confidence, competitiveness, and fearlessness of the elite athletes found throughout the history of Penn State University. All sales from Blue White Outfitters directly benefit Penn State student athletes. Visit www.bluewhiteoutfitters.com today. And if you're looking for the perfect beer for Penn State football season, we've got you covered with the State IPA. Special thanks to our friends at Funk Brewing for creating the best tailgate and game day beer for Nittany Lion fans. State IPA will be available at beer distributors, grocery stores, Funk's tap rooms, plus select bars and restaurants beginning on Thursday, August 31st. Visit funkbrewing.com/beers/state-IPA to learn where and how you can get State IPA. Visit the website in the description of this podcast for more information. Must be 21 years or older to purchase. Please drink responsibly. All right, Justin. So you remember how 2 months ago we did an episode about the Big Ten putting out their schedule for 2024 and 2025 and divisions going away and the realignment being done. It's not done, apparently. Oregon and Washington confirmed to be heading to the Big Ten in 2024. RIP the Pac-12, now the Pac-4, it seems like. It's kind of heartbreaking when you think about it, but at the same time, what was your initial reaction to Oregon and Washington joining Penn State and the rest of the Big Ten?
Well, I'm not necessarily surprised. I mean, I'm on record articles saying the rose-colored glasses are coming off of college sports, and one of the main things that we were paying attention to, obviously NIL, transfer portal, but it was the conference realignment. And if you paid attention to the TV contracts, that's been a major thing for some time now. And just seeing how the forecasting of college sports, where does it go? It's oh, these conferences have to align. Just coming from the space of even trying to start a football league and trying to, our goal is to get media rights and money to get revenue to pay for players and different things of that nature. We'll get into some of those other things, but I guess that I was expecting this to be the next step. A month before the season starts, can never underestimate the leadership in NCAA.
I know, and this was so weird developing this week in that it sounded like it was going to happen, and then it was overnight everything has changed, and then overnight everything changed back, and this was happening. And at the same time, the mass exodus from the Pac-12 continues, and that Arizona State, and Utah are off to the Big 12, as was Colorado a number of weeks ago. So it's, like I said, it's kind of heartbreaking is the word I use. I'm not a Pac-12 fan, but for it to just be Stanford, Cal, Washington State, and Oregon State left over, even the head coach of Washington State was saying, this is disappointing, obviously, because it's the end, potentially, of the Apple Cup, Washington State, for those that care about that rivalry. Oregon versus Oregon State, formerly known as the Civil War. I have no idea what they call it now. But these rivalry games that are important to fans, yeah, it's difficult. But this is about money, and the Pac-12 seems to be dying.
And when you're saying that, I mean, those are the rose-colored glasses that I'm speaking of, where we talk about how important a rivalry game is, where it's really about, which kind of money do we generate from these two fan bases, right? And so if we can generate different types of fans from cross country and the whole national college football league to an extent, why not make that the forefront of our agenda? But even with that being said, I like it because it's like playing cards up. Instead of saying okay, this is about tradition, this is about this is about education, they're putting it on the table and they're showing their cards look, this is about money, this is about conference realignment, this is about media rights and different things of that nature. So everything, even from the Oregon coach saying something about Colorado leaving
what is Colorado
week prior, right? All those different aspects, and it's important, but I think it's good for everybody to look at the same playing field and say okay, what are we up against? What do we need to do? Even for recruits that are coming out of high school, where it's they sit in front of these administrators and coaches of hey, we're going to be we're going to be here. This is how we're doing things. And so now people can make smart decisions moving forward with their careers.
I understand what the conferences have to say in regards to their public statements, but give me a break with these academic standards and all that.
That's what I'm saying. So it's like
BS. I understand they have to say that stuff, but at the end of the day, these schools, Oregon and Washington joining the Big Ten, it's self-preservation after a while because it is becoming the SEC versus the Big Ten. And now you've got 18 teams that are going to be in the Big Ten starting in 2024, by the way. That will kick off 2024, 2025. And it comes back to what I said, jokingly to start this show. Now looking back on it, is it a situation where the Big Ten, in your opinion, should they go back and think about divisions again? How do you redraw these schedules for 2024, 2025, the protected rivalries and opponents? It's far more complicated.
That's where it gets real great because we can bring in player safety, right? We're talking about like how guys are traveling across the country. I mean, the different sports in between, like in the middle of the weeks and things of that nature, along with, and parity amongst the schedules of that travel, right? So I think there's a lot of different aspects, whether not having the media rights deal, but like really forming these different entities so these guys can participate in a revenue generating operation. I think that's where it's going. And that's why the conference are realignment to kind of build that structure where that can take place. But I'll be clear. I like the move. Like, I like how it's set up. Like, I think it's going to be great for Penn State fans to get out to Seattle to see UW. It's a beautiful stadium, getting out to see Oregon. And like just kind of shuffling up the cards. Like you said, it's moving into this new age of college sports for the past 3 years. So like now, instead of just saying it and looking at all the like hypocrisies of what we're saying versus what we're doing, now it's starting to line up of like, all right, there's money, we're making money decisions. And so now everybody can operate accordingly. My problem always has been, hey, we're saying we're playing on this playing field, but everybody else should be operating down here. Mm-hmm. And now it's like, okay, we're operating here. So now we're getting clear. So I think there's going to be some time before they decide if they're going to create a division type situation again, because at the end of the day, these conferences are just a level of what NFC, AFC at the end. Super Bowl is always the biggest thing. So we talk about the playoffs and making sure that's situated. I think that becomes the next conversation is like, how do we feed all these things into the playoffs? I think that's the number one thing beyond creating divisions within the Big Ten.
And there was a tweet put out by reporter Ross Dellinger. 2 college football playoff commissioners have told Yahoo Sports that the 6-6 expansion format should be re-examined starting in 24. The 6 highest ranked conference champions get at-large spots, and next 6 highest ranked teams get at-large spots. So this whole thing, that what we thought was going into next season was in place, completely thrown off. And here's the other thing I think about, Justin, is that for a long time, people have referred to Penn State as the number 3 team in the Big Ten in terms of overall success.
Right.
And I'll sit here and say, yeah, that's hard to argue against, and considering what Ohio State and Michigan have done and the rest of the conference as a whole. It was already going to be difficult enough adding USC into that mix next season, because now it's a question of who's 3, who's 4 in that respect. And nothing against UCLA. Oregon with Nike money, and even Washington, who looked very good last season, who knows what they can be. It just gets a lot more difficult for James Franklin and company to have success in the Big Ten that will satiate this fan base. And to me, I look at what this season is, the last season before all these newcomers arrive, and also the last season where it's just 4 teams in the playoff. Does this ramp up the pressure on Penn State to win this season?
I think there's some credible evidence to say yes, that it ramps up the urgency to win this year. But also, it's a great timing for this year. And the way that I think Penn State's built for the future, with the way Penn State's built for the future and the way that the conference are realigning from a personnel standpoint, I feel like they sit in a good space where they're evenly distributed in the sense of how their team is built. I think the one thing when we talk about conference realignment, you always thought Big Ten, big, fast, like there's a type of football being played. The West Coast, there's a type of football being played, and football is a game of matchups. So I do feel like UW and USC, there's a level of them coming to the Big Ten that's going to be more of a transition for them than more so the Big Ten teams that are already there. But with that being said, like when we play UW in the PlayStation Fiesta Bowl back when you could just tell that there was a different makeup of the team, and that was a talented team. So with that being said, I think it's going to be interesting to see how that all matriculates down into the recruiting battles, because now it's a different pitch when you're like a national recruiting powerhouse like Oregon or UW's now trying to recruit different areas of the country, because man, this is a whole league. A lot of times people recruit based on, hey, this is SEC, we're playing in the Big 12. And now it's like, hey, we're going after this playoff berth, and what kind of personnel and team can we do to hit those at-large bids or win the conference? So I think it's going to be interesting to see the whole operation of college football continue to shift.
You were a 5-star recruit to Penn State. You understand what that courting process is like. Now that the map for the Big Ten has literally expanded once again, would that affect a recruit in terms of potentially going to the Big Ten? Because let's not forget, as a student athlete, now you have to factor in coast-to-coast travel, which before this, it's like, yeah, you would do that in non-conference games, but to have that as a regular part of your schedule, plus your course load, et cetera. And like, I'm not going to sit here and say that every college football student athlete across the country has a rigorous class schedule. There's schools that just don't cooperate the same way that Penn State does. Penn State's like, you're going to freaking class, you're going to do all this stuff. But it is something you would have to pause and think about. It's like, man, you're inheriting a hell of a schedule, and you've lived that. So how would you evaluate it if you're a recruit right now?
I mean, coming out, I think when schools recruit from that conference base, they're recruiting about the value prop is the exposure. So I would look at it more so it's like, okay, we're getting coastal eyes, right? If I'm like the Big Ten is getting the West Coast and the East Coast, like power cities. When we talk about Penn State being in the mecca of the tri-state area, then you got Ohio State, Michigan, just different areas in the East Coast, and we talk about the TV rights and things of that nature. Now you bring in like the fans from the West Coast, UCLA, USC. I think that's where my mind would be going from a recruit standpoint if I'm trying to build up my NIL or trying to play amongst, I guess, the most casual fans as possible. Obviously, everybody loves SEC football, but the reach of that league is completely different when you talk about the Big Ten and now adding in the power ecosystems on the West Coast and just kind of plucking those. And you said like an Oregon base, which is kind of out there by itself, but it's backed by Nike, right? So they're going to be able to compete and be within their transfer portal, all the different opportunities that come with that bi-coastal conference. That would be super appealing to me as I was coming out of high school, from like a exposure and putting myself in the best place to show my talents.
You and I were talking about this story that also came out that I think plays into this overall conference realignment discussion. There's a story that came out this week that apparently JP Morgan Chase is in discussions with Florida State in talks of creating a private equity company to raise money that would essentially be behind the football program, or at least behind the entire athletics program. Again, this is just kind of a word going around at the moment, and I'm trying to find the story here on my phone. So basically, for those who don't necessarily understand what a private equity fund means, and nor did I before this began, the school's considering a structure that's similar to many of those pro sports investments where commercial rights are rolled into a new company. The private equity fund invests in that entity, and then it recoups its money via future media sponsorship revenue. This is how a company called Silver Lake structured its investment into the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team, which is a colossal business for those that don't know. This is something that you and I were talking about before we got started. Doesn't shock me at all that this is happening, because for years, before NIL especially, if you're a booster, you give the money, and you might get a wing of the football building named after you, or a section of the stadium, or the stadium itself, or something like that, and that's great. But you give that money away, and then you just that's the end of the transaction for the most part. And it doesn't shock me that these people investing their money through NIL, through other means, want their money back and want a return on that investment. And now you're looking at the privatization of specifically college football teams. What do you think?
I mean, I think, again, it's about time, right? In the sense of, at the beginning of NIL, I've been screaming like, well, it's not sustainable from just getting people's money and passing it over. I mean, at the XFL, like we were at the WWE, you understand, it was like, okay, we had to get money. We had to show how we can get it back. So even coming into the whole NIL space, whether starting a business and things of that nature, it was like, how can you build an asset that can generate revenue, right? So even from the standpoints of creating Lockdown U and having Lawn Boys, being like a shell to be able to build out an entity where there's an investable asset there, where you can do different things within the sports ecosystem because that's the fan base that you're building off of. So like once you see like the money that's flowing into the sports or just the college playoffs being $1 billion business, you see what happened with Live and all these different assets. I mean, sports is a true asset class. And with that being said, looking at college sports, it's a disarray. So that means there's opportunity. So with that being said, it makes perfect sense for institutional investors to get in and create a structure to solve the problem of revenue sharing or seeing where money's flowing. If that's the problem that no one can figure out, like it's just, you know what I mean? So I'm happy that is the conversation is being had. And now we get down to the operation of who's going to make those moves to build out an infrastructure for themselves. Because like that's competitive advantage, to be completely honest, moving forward.
A huge competitive advantage. And I feel for the purists and the traditionalists of college football, because to a degree I identify with that, but I do want to see progress for the sport and for the athletes. However, this is something that I think a lot of people have understood for a while, and some people maybe wanted to turn a blind eye to, is that this is a business at the end of the day. And if you're going to be investing this much money into athletes, facilities, recruiting, coaches, etc., you want your money back and you want to see a return on an investment. And when I look at this expansion with the Big Ten, specifically coming back to Oregon coming, I mentioned the Nike money. I am shocked Oregon didn't jump earlier because Nike has a vested interest in the success of the Oregon Ducks program altogether. And then I look at Under Armour. I know they just put their largest deal ever in place with Notre Dame Athletics. I think $10 million a year specifically for the football program. That might be the school altogether. I'm not sure. But then I look at Under Armour supporting the University of Maryland, which is in their backyard, and they help build that program into a competent program once again. This opens the floodgates for Nike and Under Armour to prop up those two teams within the Big Ten if they so choose.
Oh yeah, I mean Maryland's been there for a little bit, right? Just talk about get into the brand power. Down we're talking about the schools. I think Oregon really plays a major factor because, like you say, throwing around the money and Nike, that's beyond college, right? And now we're talking if you're a high level athlete and you have opportunity outside of football. When we talk about track, basketball, all these other different sports where Nike reigns supreme, that's where you're talking about that talent acquisition where Oregon becomes a real interesting player in the Big Ten. But I mean, again, I like all these things moving forward because this is the only sustainable way of doing like this college business. And it's like to just go back a little bit. We talk about the NIL and the fundraising institutes the collectives that are coming up. I mean, the normal college model has been flawed, right? Like raise money, pass it off if you're not paying the talent. So now that the spotlight's on like how is the talent getting paid, that model just doesn't. The rose-colored glasses don't work anymore. So with that being said, these are the steps that need to be implemented. It's just a completely different model than what we've been operating under.
Everything's changing. I'm very curious to see what happens with the remaining 4 teams in the Pac-12, if that conference even continues to exist. A lot of people have talked about them, having to maybe just join the ACC just to exist. So the entire map of college football has been redrawn. Right. To all our viewers and listeners, please let us know what you think in the comment section. Comment, like, subscribe, turn on notifications, rate us. We appreciate you guys diving in. Justin, final thoughts on what this all means specifically for Penn State football.
I think this is actually a great thing for Penn State football. Penn State being a very regional university, when there's recruiting and different things of that nature. I just remember working there and playing it and having those big performances at the Rose Bowl and getting in front of the fans on the West Coast. And just that brand building of Penn State connects in a lot of different areas within the country. So just from a brand building standpoint, I think it's great. I think it's also good when we talked about the personnel and how Penn State's built to this point and how the teams are situated within the Big Ten. Like it's a nice range of, powerful offenses or more high flying speed guys on the outside from the West Coast, whatever like the build and makeup are. So I think it's great for the football program. And I think it's good for the branding. And the one thing that everyone has to kind of bring their heads together and just acknowledge is the player health and safety when we talk about the traveling and the schools and all these things. But if you look at it as a real professional sport, I mean, got to kind of deal with it, but that means they have to be compensated.
Mm-hmm. It sure as hell feels professional. There are the expectations for Penn State. What the pressure to win now is astronomical for 2023. Thank you all so much for joining us. A little preview this coming Wednesday's episode. Our special guest will be former Penn State quarterback, the captain, Darryl Clark. We're really looking forward to having him on. So thank you all for joining us, and sound off in the comments section because there are a lot of layers to this conference realignment. Thank you all so much for joining us. This episode and our entire library of shows is available now on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, TuneIn, and wherever else you get your podcasts. And of course, let us know what you think of the show on Twitter @TheKing1 and @TomHannafin. State of State is presented by Bet Online.